All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into an event that was all over the news recently, the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska.
That's right.
You've sent us some incredible sources, and we're going to sift through them to grasp what really happened, what it signifies for the world, and yeah, even tackle that rather audacious question of a Nobel Peace Prize.
It's definitely a lot to unpack.
We're going to explore not just the bare facts, the who, what, where, but the surprising paradoxes of modern diplomacy. We'll examine why a seemingly straightforward meeting between leaders can turn into this huge global spectacle and what it might actually take to move beyond, like a historic handshake, to genuine, lasting peace on the ground.
It's a critical question.
So get ready for some insights that might just change how you view international relations and the high-stakes game of global statecraft.
Indeed. And this deep dive focuses on three pivotal articles that each offer a distinct lens on this moment in geopolitics. We'll analyze the summit's minute details, its broader implications for global statecraft, and that highly speculative, yet, intriguing discussion around recognition for peace efforts.
Right.
Our mission is really to distill the most critical nuggets of knowledge from these sources, ensuring you walk away truly well-informed, equipped with a nuanced understanding, without feeling, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information and noise surrounding these kinds of high-profile events.
Welcome back. So let's pull back the curtain on this event that, for a few hours anyway, held the world's attention. The Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. Picture this, August 15th, 2025. It's the fourth year of a brutal, grinding war in Ukraine.
A long 4 years.
A conflict that has fundamentally reshaped Europe and triggered, global reverberations. And in that context, after years of silence and, frankly, mounting animosity, these two leaders finally sit down face to face.
A huge moment, symbolically.
Yeah. Our sources really capture the immense weight of this moment, a meeting long anticipated, yet, as we'll discover, also strangely anticlimactic in its immediate outcomes.
And that's the crucial point, isn't it? The sheer weight of this meeting, given the ongoing conflict, it truly cannot be overstated. It was the first direct face-to-face encounter between a U.S. president and the Russian president since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022.
Right, since the very beginning.
Think about the symbolism of that alone. The anticipation leading up to it was enormous, fueled by global media and just the sheer gravity of a conflict now in its fourth year.
Yeah, everyone was watching.
Yet, as our sources highlight, the actual concrete outcomes were quite limited, almost anticlimactic in comparison to the hype. Russian state media, for their part, certainly tried to frame it as a truly monumental occasion, consistently calling the moment historic.
Oh, I bet they did.
This framing itself tells us something vital about the narrative objectives at play. They wanted to project an image of two great powers engaging, perhaps normalizing a situation that is anything but normal, aiming to sort of reset diplomatic perceptions.
Absolutely. The devil, as always, is in the details. And this summit had plenty of fascinating specifics that reveal a lot about the diplomatic dance.
It always is.
The meeting itself lasted nearly 3 hours, held at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska. What's particularly interesting is that it was initially announced as strictly one-on-one, just Trump and Putin.
Which would have been remarkable.
A private, intimate conversation between the two power brokers. However, it quickly expanded to include senior aides, transforming it into a more formal diplomatic engagement.
Right, that changed things.
On the U.S. side, we saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy to Russia Steve Witkoff. For Russia, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Putin's longtime foreign policy advisor Yuri Ushakov were present.
The usual key players.
So, while the initial idea might have been a more personal exchange, the reality required a broader diplomatic and bureaucratic presence, implying the need for, official records, expert counsel, and structured representation.
And that expansion to include senior aides is quite significant. It suggests a certain level of formality and the inherent need for official note-taking and representation, even if the leaders might have preferred a more private initial chat.
Makes sense.
What's truly fascinating here, and indeed eyebrow-raising as one source put it, is the detail that Trump and Putin actually shared a brief private car ride together.
Oh, really? I missed that detail.
Yeah. This off-the-record discussion sparks immediate and intense speculation among diplomatic observers. What could they have said or agreed upon away from the official channels, away from the, prying ears and watchful eyes of their respective teams?
Exactly. What gets said in the car?
Such moments are exceptionally rare in high-level diplomacy, and they can hold immense, though often unconfirmed, implications. Was it a moment of unexpected candor? A shared laugh over some triviality that eased tension?
Or something more substantial.
Or, perhaps, as some speculate, a whispered agreement, or a subtle understanding that bypassed all the formal channels and aids. These unscripted moments, rare as they are, can sometimes be more revealing or even more impactful than hours of official talks, simply because they allow for a degree of personal connection or directness that's otherwise, well, impossible.
It's like a secret subplot woven into the larger diplomatic drama, isn't it?
Exactly.
And speaking of drama, the summit was choreographed as a full-blown spectacle. We're talking a complete ceremonial welcome, a red carpet rolled out, military honor guards standing at attention,
The whole 9 yards.
and even fighter jet flyovers slicing through the Alaskan sky. It was quite the show, designed to convey gravity and importance.
Optics are key.
Beyond the protocol, Putin also made a very deliberate symbolic gesture. He visited a local memorial to lay flowers at the graves of Soviet pilots who died on World War II Lend-Lease missions in Alaska.
Invoking history.
This was a masterful historical nod, emphasizing a narrative of U.S.-Russian cooperation from a bygone era, perhaps trying to harken back to a time of alliance and shared victory rather than current animosity.
That historical emphasis by Putin is a classic move in statecraft, a strategic attempt to frame the present through a more favorable past, to conjure an image of past camaraderie despite current antagonism.
It makes sense strategically.
And the choice of Alaska as the venue was absolutely deliberate, laden with multi-layered symbolism. The Bering Strait, after all, separates Russia and the U.S. by only 4 kilometers, a mere sliver of water.
Incredible when you think about it, just 4 kilometers.
This geographic closeness was repeatedly invoked by both sides, serving as a constant reminder that these two nations are indeed neighbors, despite their current geopolitical chasm. Our sources highlighted how the venue itself became a powerful symbol, evoking profound historical reminders. From Russia's sale of Alaska to the United States in 1867.
A huge historical event.
A truly foundational historical transaction that expanded the U.S. and effectively shrunk Russia's North American footprint to the cooperation of American and Soviet forces during World War II, when Alaska served as a crucial staging ground for the Lend-Lease program.
Connecting past cooperation to present tension.
Exactly. And the sources also underscored the continued presence of Russian heritage within the state itself, with Orthodox churches and Russian place names still evident today. This reinforces a narrative of shared history and connection, deliberately chosen to perhaps soften the edges of present-day hostility.
So a lot of stagecraft, a lot of symbolism, carefully chosen to set a particular tone.
Definitely.
But when the doors closed and the real conversation began, what was actually on the table? What were the key themes and discussions that truly transpired?
Well, unsurprisingly, the dominant and most pressing issue was the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Had to be number one.
Trump explicitly positioned himself as a peacemaker, focusing with urgency on seeking a rapid ceasefire to end the bloodshed and alleviate the humanitarian crisis.
His focus was the immediate violence.
But Putin, from his side, took a fundamentally different approach. He insisted that the root causes of the conflict, specifically mentioning NATO expansion and Ukraine's westward drift, had to be addressed first, before any truce could be considered.
So a fundamental disagreement on sequencing. Ceasefire first, or address grievances first.
Precisely. This immediately highlighted a fundamental divergence in their approaches. One seeking a quick halt to violence, the other demanding a resolution to deeply ingrained, perceived underlying grievances.
Okay, let's unpack that divergence a bit more. You mentioned Putin's focus on root causes. What exactly does that entail from his perspective, according to the sources?
To unpack that divergence, our sources reveal a fundamental chasm in their security paradigms. When Putin speaks of existential threats to Russia, he's not just talking about immediate battlefield concerns or localized skirmishes.
It's bigger than that for him.
He's echoing a long-held Russian strategic doctrine that views NATO expansion as an encroaching military perimeter, a direct and unacceptable threat to Russia's strategic depth and its historical sphere of influence in Eastern Europe.
Right, the encirclement narrative.
He views Ukraine's westward drift, its embrace of democratic values and Euro-Atlantic integration, as an integral part of this existential challenge, a direct erosion of Russia's security buffer.
And Trump's view of security, how does that compare?
Trump, on the other hand, while certainly concerned with global stability and geopolitical optics, tends to frame security in more immediate transactional terms, reducing tensions, stopping the bloodshed.
More about the immediate outcome.
He focuses on observable outcomes, perhaps without fully engaging with the deeper, often ideologically charged historical grievances that drive Russian foreign policy. This makes achieving a shared understanding of security incredibly difficult, even when they agree on the need for it in principle.
That's a powerful distinction, highlighting how they approach the same concept from entirely different worldviews.
No.
And when it came down to Ukraine-specific issues, Trump pressed hard for an immediate end to the violence, calling the war a tragedy for the Ukrainian people.
Understandably.
Putin, despite the ongoing aggression, ironically referred to Ukrainians as brotherly, but held firm. He insisted that no truce was possible without concrete guarantees on Ukraine's neutrality and NATO's future posture, essentially demanding a rollback of Ukraine's sovereign choices regarding its alliances.
Which is a non-starter for Kyiv and the West.
So while both expressed a desire for peace, their non-negotiables were, as you say, diametrically opposed, creating an immediate deadlock on the central issue.
Right.
This summit wasn't just a spontaneous meeting either. It was preceded by months of meticulous diplomatic groundwork.
Oh yeah, a lot went into it beforehand.
Our sources detail numerous phone calls between Trump and Putin, a discreet visit to Russia by Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, and multiple rounds of contacts between the U.S. and Russian foreign ministries. This wasn't a whim. It was a carefully orchestrated, long-game effort to set the stage for this direct encounter.
That extensive groundwork underscores the high stakes involved, even if the public outcome was limited. What was conspicuously absent from this high-profile meeting, despite Trump's earlier suggestion of a trilateral meeting, was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
That's a huge point. The person most affected wasn't there.
This absence is a critical point. Diplomacy concerning Ukraine's future, without Ukraine itself at the table, creates an inherent limitation, an ethical dilemma, and ultimately questions the legitimacy and sustainability of any potential agreements.
Absolutely.
Trump did pledge to brief Zelensky and NATO allies afterward by phone, but as our sources emphasize, it's simply not the same as direct participation and ownership of the process.
No, it really isn't.
This suggests that while a door to dialogue may have opened between Washington and Moscow, it's far from a fully inclusive or potentially lasting peace process for Kyiv.
So with all that context, all that buildup, all that symbolism, all those intricate discussions, what was actually achieved, and perhaps more importantly, what wasn't?
Right, the bottom line.
Both leaders, in public remarks, described the talks in surprisingly upbeat terms. Trump called them constructive and claimed, "We made some headway."
Standard diplomatic language, perhaps?
Putin, echoing the sentiment, described them as a reference point for solving the Ukraine problem and restoring ties. It seems almost too good to be true, doesn't it? Constructive, made some headway.
It does sound positive on the surface.
But then, the caveat, no deal until there's a deal. Expert, our sources suggest this wasn't just a cautious statement, but a stark admission. How do analysts, viewing this immediate aftermath, truly interpret these seemingly upbeat remarks against the reality of no concrete breakthroughs?
And that's where the nuance truly lies. On the surface, yes, positive language, but the optimism was severely limited by Trump's crucial caveat. There's no deal until there's a deal.
The fine print.
This simple statement underlined the stark reality that no concrete breakthroughs were announced. Analysts, observing the immediate aftermath, largely viewed the meeting as merely incremental progress, at best, with one source calling it a conversation, not a conclusion.
Just talking.
The consensus was a grim one. It had little impact on the battlefield or sanctions regime. This is a crucial distinction that our sources consistently emphasize. A mere meeting of minds, a cordial conversation, is not necessarily a change on the ground where the war continues to rage with devastating effect.
And when we look at the specific agreements reached, or rather, the lack thereof, it confirms that absence of concrete action.
Pretty thin.
No formal agreements were signed. Instead, both sides simply agreed to continue dialogue on Ukraine and bilateral relations, essentially agreeing to keep talking, which, while better than not talking, is hardly a major diplomatic feat after years of conflict.
It's the lowest possible bar, really, agreeing to talk again.
They also recognized the vague need for a balance of security in Europe, which implicitly included Ukraine's security, though no specifics were given on how that balance would be achieved or what it would entail for Ukraine.
Very vague indeed. What does balance even mean here?
And Trump vaguely mentioned many points of understanding. But again, frustratingly for those seeking tangible outcomes, no details were released to the public.
Keeping cards close to the chest.
The most important takeaways here are what was crucially absent. There was no ceasefire, no territorial arrangements were made regarding occupied Ukrainian lands, and no sanctions relief was secured for Russia. These are the big-ticket items, the core demands from both sides, and they remained completely untouched by this initial summit.
Precisely. The points of disagreement highlight the fundamental chasm that persists, making any immediate peace elusive. On the Ukraine resolution approach, Trump's push for a rapid ceasefire to halt casualties was met with Putin's resolute rejection, as he insisted on addressing Russia's strategic concerns first, essentially demanding concessions before stopping the fighting.
The sequencing problem again.
This made a quick truce improbable, if not impossible. Trump himself admitted there were a couple big ones we haven't quite got there, hinting at the profound obstacles.
What were those big ones likely referring to?
These were almost certainly references to NATO expansion, the internationally recognized status of Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014, and the existing comprehensive international sanctions regime, all fundamental sticking points for which no resolution appears in sight, at least not from this initial summit.
So the core issues remain completely unresolved.
Fundamentally, yes.
And despite these deep disagreements and the limited concrete outcomes, there's still talk of another meeting, keeping a flicker of hope alive.
Always the next meeting.
Putin actually extended a direct invitation for Trump to visit Moscow for further talks, a significant diplomatic gesture in itself.
Interesting. On his turf.
Trump, for his part, responded that there was a very good chance of follow-ups, though no date or venue was set. Trump also promised to engage Zelensky directly, potentially paving the way for more complex, multi-party negotiations down the line, recognizing that a sustainable peace cannot be brokered without Ukraine's direct involvement.
A necessary step, bringing Kyiv in.
So the door to dialogue is ajar, but certainly not wide open, and the path ahead remains fraught with significant challenges. Okay, here's where it gets truly thought-provoking, and where our sources offer a really illuminating aha moment that changes how you might view international relations.
Let's hear it.
We just covered the ceremonial grandeur of the Alaska summit, the red carpet, the flyovers, the global headlines it generated. But the profound insight here, as our sources argue, is that the very fact that a simple face-to-face meeting between two world leaders is considered a monumental headline event is frankly deeply troubling.
Right. Why is that the news?
It's not the outcome that's celebrated, but the meeting itself, and that surprisingly points to a kind of crisis in diplomacy.
Precisely. Think about it. In a healthier, more robust diplomatic landscape, basic dialogue, regular high-level meetings should be as routine as exchanging ambassadors or holding ministerial working groups.
Just part of the job.
Those are the engines of statecraft, the quiet, persistent work of managing complex relationships. But what we've witnessed is a profound erosion of that normalcy. When just showing up becomes the story, when the sheer act of leaders sitting across a table is hailed as a breakthrough, it signals that the bar for international engagement has plummeted.
The bar is incredibly low.
Our sources delve into this, highlighting how this shift turns fundamental diplomacy into a rare spectacle, a performance designed for public consumption, rather than the quiet, grinding work of finding common ground. It's almost as if the sheer act of sitting down together is seen as a victory in itself, regardless of what's actually accomplished.
It's almost like a theatrical production where the curtain opening is the main event, rather than the play itself.
That's a great analogy.
This is why you, the listener, should care deeply about whether leaders meet. In a healthier climate, we'd be focusing on concrete outcomes: a ceasefire, a new treaty, a joint declaration with substance, the details of a peace agreement.
The substance should be the story.
But when merely initiating dialogue is celebrated as monumental, it points to a fundamental challenge in effective global governance. It suggests a world starved of basic diplomatic engagement, where the very act of talking is seen as a fragile miracle.
A worrying sign.
This, our sources argue, severely lowers the bar for what constitutes a breakthrough.
And that leads us directly to that concept of the bar for breakthrough. Our sources assert that if the Trump-Putin sit-down genuinely turns into a real lasting step toward ending the Ukraine war, it will certainly deserve recognition, perhaps even a Nobel, as we discussed.
If it actually leads somewhere.
But the deeper lesson, and a critical insight, is that global politics shouldn't be so starved of normal diplomacy that simply meeting is treated as a breakthrough. The bar has sunk so low for what qualifies as major political news that basic engagement is now celebrated as monumental.
It's a strange state of affairs.
The stark contrast between the ceremonial grandeur of the Alaska summit, complete with red carpets and fighter jets, versus its limited concrete outcomes, starkly underscores this very point. It was a grand show for remarkably modest results, highlighting a fundamental crisis in the expectation and practice of international relations.
So we have this fragile momentum from Alaska, a tiny crack in the door, but it's exactly that. Fragile.
Very fragile.
This brings us to the profound urgency of follow-up. Our sources stress that if this opening isn't quickly reinforced, the war risks hardening into a grinding stalemate, potentially dragging on for years.
Which benefits no one, ultimately, except perhaps those invested in the conflict itself.
Why is time so definitively not on diplomacy's side here? Because with each passing month, battlefield realities harden. Russia continues to press its military advantage, digging in deeper, constructing fortified defensive lines,
Making future negotiations even harder.
while Ukraine faces mounting casualties, severe economic strain, and a dangerously flagging international attention span.
This phenomenon of Ukraine fatigue in Western publics is a very real and growing concern, and Russia is clearly banking on it.
They're playing the long game.
They are strategically waiting out U.S. electoral cycles, anticipating potential shifts in leadership or policy, and hoping to exploit existing European divisions. They see time as being on their side and of the conflict itself, even if it creates a diplomatic urgency for others.
That's a chilling calculation.
Our sources specifically highlight the historical impact of winter conditions on the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, noting how the harsh cold and difficult terrain often worsen conditions dramatically for civilians and soldiers alike,
Making everything harder, more brutal.
making sustained combat even more brutal and creating greater humanitarian needs. This cyclical challenge further drives the argument for a rapid second summit, ideally in September or October 2025, to try and secure some framework, or at least a temporary truce, before winter exacerbates the humanitarian crisis and entrenches military positions even further.
So strike while the iron is, if not hot, at least lukewarm.
Exactly. The momentum from the first summit needs to be capitalized on quickly,
Mm.
or it risks dissipating into the ongoing brutal conflict.
Now, let's pivot to something truly unique and, frankly, a bit audacious, almost bordering on the theatrical. The Nobel Peace Prize question.
Ah yes, the Nobel talk.
Our sources delve into this, noting with considerable emphasis that this might be the very first time in history that anyone has actively campaigned for the Nobel Peace Prize for himself.
That is quite something.
That's a pretty strong and provocative statement, isn't it? It signifies a distinctive, almost unprecedented approach to personal recognition on the global stage, a departure from the traditional humility often associated with such an honor.
It's certainly an unprecedented pursuit. Normally, Nobel laureates are chosen by committee, often to their genuine surprise, for long-standing efforts or breakthrough achievements that speak for themselves.
Right. It's bestowed, not sought after publicly like this.
To actively lobby for it oneself signifies a very specific kind of political climate, where personal brand and public perception are paramount, and an individual's ambition knows few bounds. It inherently shifts the focus from the inherent merit of the peace effort to the personal gain and ego of the individual campaigner.
But then the sources throw a curveball.
They do. However, our sources then pose a provocative and almost counterintuitive question. Yet, if Donald Trump's effort bears fruit, if he genuinely manages to bring the Ukraine war to an end, then why not? Give the man the Peace Prize.
Just give it to him if he stops the war.
And then they add this kicker. The award has gone to stranger recipients in the past.
Ooh, okay. That's a truly bold claim, stranger recipients, and it hits at a fascinating paradox.
It does. It really forces you to think.
It highlights the historical context of the Nobel Peace Prize, which, let's be honest, has often been surrounded by intense debate and controversy regarding some of its past choices and the timing of certain awards.
Absolutely. It's not without its controversial history.
There have been instances where the process of awarding it, or the perceived political motivations, has drawn sharp criticism. So this argument implicitly acknowledges that by focusing solely on the outcome real, verifiable peace, rather than the complex, often unconventional process or the personality of the campaigner, the why not, gains a strange sort of credibility.
It prioritizes the result over everything else.
It forces us to separate the messenger from the message, the means from the end.
Indeed. It forces us to consider a fascinating and ethically complex question. If a leader does secure peace, thereby saving countless lives, averting further suffering, does the unconventional path they took, or even their personal lobbying for the prize, diminish the actual monumental achievement of ending a war?
Does the how matter as much as the what in this extreme case?
How do we, as observers and analysts, weigh the process against the result in such a high-stakes scenario, where human lives are literally on the line? The sources seem to suggest that, in a situation of extreme suffering and conflict, the ultimate cessation of hostilities, the profound human impact of peace, might indeed outweigh the unconventional nature of how it was achieved, or the ego involved in campaigning for the recognition.
A pragmatic view, maybe.
It's a pragmatic, almost utilitarian view of the prize, the greatest good for the greatest number, perhaps.
But, and this is the absolute monumental if that defines this entire discussion.
The biggest if possible.
The critical condition for this prize, or for any genuine recognition, is that if the outcome is real peace, that should count for something.
It has to be real peace.
Our sources are very clear on this. At the Alaska summit, there was no ceasefire, territorial arrangements, or sanctions relief secured. The peace prospects, as they explicitly state, are still very limited. The war is still ongoing at full intensity, and millions of lives continue to be impacted daily.
This raises an incredibly important question for you, the listener, as you consider the complexities of this conflict. What exactly constitutes real peace in such a complex and multifaceted conflict?
Good question. What does real peace look like here?
Is it merely the absence of active fighting, a temporary truce? Or does it require a more comprehensive, lasting resolution, including the restoration of territorial integrity, some form of justice for victims, and a viable, lasting security framework for Ukraine?
It's going to be more than just silence on the front lines.
And critically, how would one definitively attribute such a profound achievement to a single individual's efforts, especially in a conflict with so many internal and external players, shifting geopolitical dynamics and deeply entrenched historical grievances at play?
Right. Can one person really claim sole credit?
It's a far more intricate question than simply war ends, a word given, demanding careful consideration of all the nuanced conditions that define a true and sustainable peace.
When we talk about high-stakes summits, particularly those aiming to de-escalate major global conflicts, it's almost impossible not to look to history for parallels and lessons.
History often rhymes, as they say.
And in this case, the Alaska meeting has been explicitly compared to the iconic Reagan-Gorbachev summits of 1985-1989. These were truly landmark events that fundamentally thawed Cold War tensions and ultimately led to significant arms control agreements, like the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces (INF) Treaty,
A huge achievement.
which eliminated an entire class of nuclear missiles. It's a tempting and powerful comparison, isn't it? Two seemingly intractable adversaries finally sitting down to talk, shifting the global paradigm.
It is, and our sources provide a detailed comparative analysis that helps us understand the crucial nuances and why the comparison, while useful, is also fraught with differences.
Okay, let's break that down. Context first.
Let's look at the context. The Reagan-Gorbachev summits operated within a Cold War ideological standoff defined by a global nuclear arms race and the existential threat of mutually assured destruction. Their primary focus was on arms control and reducing the risk of global annihilation.
A different kind of existential threat.
The Trump-Putin summit, however, is set against an active hot war in Ukraine, with Russia as the clear aggressor currently under severe international sanctions. The stakes, while both high, are fundamentally different in their immediate manifestation.
How so?
For Reagan and Gorbachev, it was the abstract yet terrifying risk of global nuclear war. For Trump and Putin, it's Ukraine's very sovereignty and territorial integrity, and by extension, the stability of the entire European security order. More immediate, perhaps more tangible in some ways.
And the outcomes thus far are vastly different, underscoring the gap between initial dialogue and concrete results.
Hugely different outcomes so far.
The Reagan-Gorbachev summits, especially the Reykjavik meeting in 1986, had their initial failures, leading to no immediate agreement.
Reykjavik was seen as a failure at the time by many.
But those discussions ultimately laid the groundwork for genuine breakthroughs in arms reduction just a year later. The Trump-Putin summit, as we've discussed, resulted in no formal deal, only vague statements, and crucially, no ceasefire, the immediate humanitarian objective.
A stark contrast in immediate results.
What about the expert views on the dynamics?
From an expert view, the Reagan-Gorbachev meetings were characterized by a gradual building of trust over repeated interactions, a personal chemistry that developed, paving the way for Soviet reforms.
They built a relationship, seemingly.
Critics of the Trump-Putin summit, however, argue that it primarily served to legitimize Putin on the world stage without securing any significant concessions from him. Trump, in this view, was seen as largely chasing optics, a headline-grabbing event, rather than the intricate substance of a true peace process.
Substance versus spectacle again.
This directly impacts the long-term impact. The Reagan-Gorbachev summits are widely credited with helping to end the Cold War, ushering in a new era of reduced East-West tensions.
A monumental shift.
The long-term impact of the Trump-Putin summit remains highly uncertain, a mere opening gambit. Our sources caution that while Reagan's diplomacy ultimately bore significant fruit, the Alaska summit currently resembles his early, inconclusive efforts, such as Reykjavik, rather than the historic breakthroughs of the late 1980s that came after repeated, painstaking negotiations.
So maybe just the first step on a long road.
It's an initial step, not a conclusion, and its success hinges entirely on what follows. Furthermore, a key difference often overlooked is that Putin lacks the severe internal economic and social pressures that Mikhail Gorbachev faced,
That's a crucial point.
which arguably pushed him toward greater engagement and concessions to save the Soviet system. This means Putin has significantly less domestic incentive to compromise quickly or drastically, making the current diplomatic path potentially much slower and more arduous.
So what can this historical lens teach us about the long, often frustrating path of high-stakes diplomacy?
Well, it teaches us patience, maybe.
It's not always a Hollywood movie with a grand, immediate resolution. It often involves incremental, unglamorous steps, repeated conversations, and a slow, painful building of trust, or at least a mutual understanding of red lines before a true breakthrough can occur.
Exactly. Diplomacy is often a grind.
Alaska, in this historical context, might just be the very first step of many, a cautious probing of possibilities rather than the decisive final act. It reminds us that real change in international relations is a marathon, not a sprint.
That's a critical insight. And despite those deep divides and the sobering historical comparisons, our sources note a certain convergence, even if limited, that offers a glimmer of hope.
Okay, what's the glimmer?
The cordial tone of the summit, the acknowledgement of many points of understanding between the two leaders, and Putin's direct invitation for Trump to visit Moscow for further talks, all signal a willingness to keep talking.
Keeping the channel open.
Trump's plan to update Zelensky and NATO allies also suggests a potential movement toward broader engagement, acknowledging that Ukraine and NATO cannot be left out of future discussions, even if they were excluded from this initial direct meeting. This indicates a recognition that any lasting peace must be multilateral.
However, and this is the critical counterpoint to any burgeoning optimism,
Always a however.
fundamental divides remain stubbornly unchanged, especially Putin's insistence on addressing root causes, his non-negotiables regarding NATO and Ukraine sovereignty, before halting the war.
The same core disagreements persist.
Our sources are clear. Without Ukraine's direct and meaningful participation in the negotiations, any path to peace looks inherently incomplete, unsustainable, and ultimately illegitimate. It's like trying to resolve a family dispute by only talking to 2 of the 3 people involved.
A very apt comparison.
This raises an important point. Is talking better than shooting?
Generally, yes, you'd hope so.
Our sources suggest, yes, in general, dialogue is always preferable to pure conflict, as it opens the door to de-escalation. But the crucial question remains, is simply talking enough without addressing the core issues that led to the conflict, or without involving all the necessary parties, particularly the one whose sovereignty, territory, and very existence are directly at stake?
Is talk without substance or inclusion just noise?
The answer implicitly is no. Dialogue is a necessary condition, a vital first step, but it is certainly not a sufficient one for achieving real, lasting peace. Substance, compromise, and inclusivity are indispensable. Given this delicate situation, this fragile momentum, this narrow window of opportunity, what's the path forward? Our sources lay out some pretty bold diplomatic moves, starting with where the next summit should be held.
Location, location, location.
The logical choice, they argue, for a second Trump-Putin summit is Reykjavik, Iceland, rather than Moscow or Washington.
Back to Reykjavik.
This is crucial not just for symbolic reasons, but to genuinely ensure balance, credibility, and a sense of absolute neutrality.
And Iceland carries immense symbolic and practical significance, making it far more than just a convenient location. In October 1986, Reykjavik famously hosted U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev.
The famous Reykjavik summit.
That meeting, though inconclusive at the time and even seen as a failure by some in its immediate aftermath, was actually a pivotal moment in Cold War history. It laid the crucial groundwork for the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces (INF) Treaty, a truly landmark arms control agreement that dramatically reduced the threat of nuclear war.
So it has a history of breakthroughs after an initial difficulty.
That Reykjavik meeting is remembered as a turning point, a moment when entrenched Cold War hostility gave way to genuine, albeit difficult, dialogue and eventually profound progress. The parallels to today are striking. Then it was nuclear annihilation hanging over the world. Today, it's a grinding European war with potentially global consequences.
High stakes then, high stakes now.
Both moments reflect existential fears and deep ideological divides, making Reykjavik a powerful reminder of what can be achieved on neutral ground.
So, hosting the next Trump-Putin summit in Reykjavik would not only evoke that historic legacy, creating a powerful symbolic backdrop for breaking deadlock, but it would also instantly reassure all stakeholders of its neutrality and fairness.
Exactly. The symbolism is potent.
Let's break down why Iceland makes so much practical sense. For neutrality, it's a NATO member, yes, but notably, it has no military of its own, meaning it cannot be seen as an aggressive or dominant power.
A key point for Russia, likely.
This significantly reduces any perception of bias or unequal footing that might arise from meeting in, say, a major military power's capital. Geographically, Reykjavik is situated perfectly equidistant between North America and Europe,
Easy access for all parties.
offering equal accessibility for Washington, Moscow, and, importantly, potentially Kyiv if a truly trilateral meeting were to occur. It eliminates any perceived home field advantage.
The symbolism, as you mentioned, is profound. It doesn't just recall the Cold War thaw. It actively projects the idea of turning deadlock into progress, of superpowers overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds. It's a message that a path to de-escalation and peace can be found even in the deepest freeze.
And logistics. Is it practical?
And from a feasibility standpoint, Iceland is logistically straightforward. It has direct flight connections to major global hubs and a proven track record of successfully hosting high-level diplomatic events without incident.
So it checks all the boxes, really.
The optics truly matter here. A summit held in Moscow risks being interpreted by the world as legitimizing Russia's aggression and its current geopolitical position.
Sends the wrong message.
While one in Washington could be seen as U.S.-dominated, an assertion of American power. Reykjavik, by contrast, projects fairness, possibility, and a neutral, respectful ground where both sides can meet without either losing face or appearing to concede a strategic advantage. It signals a genuine commitment to dialogue over confrontation.
Okay, so Reykjavik makes a lot of sense. But you mentioned earlier the urgency, the need for swift follow-up.
Absolutely critical. And swift follow-up isn't just a good idea, it's absolutely critical. Time, as our sources emphasize with stark clarity, is emphatically not on diplomacy's side here.
Why so urgent now?
With each passing month, the battlefield realities harden. Russia digs in further, consolidating its territorial gains, constructing more elaborate defensive lines, while Ukraine's capacity to resist is stretched thinner and thinner, facing mounting resource and manpower shortages.
The human cost keeps rising.
Casualties continue to climb dramatically on both sides, and the humanitarian toll grows exponentially, fueling despair and potentially radicalization within the affected populations. Plus, political will is noticeably eroding in the West.
The Ukraine fatigue you mentioned.
Western publics are showing clear signs of Ukraine fatigue, with dwindling support for continued aid, while Russia is strategically banking on waiting out U.S. electoral cycles and European divisions, hoping that support for Ukraine will inevitably wane over time.
So the diplomatic window might be closing.
It feels like it. The historical impact of winter conditions on the Russo-Ukrainian conflict is also a major and often brutal factor. Our sources underline how the harsh, cold, freezing mud and difficult terrain often worsen conditions dramatically for civilians and soldiers alike,
Making fighting even harder.
making sustained combat even more brutal and costly, and amplifying the humanitarian crisis. This cyclical challenge further drives the argument for a rapid second summit, ideally in September or October 2025.
Before winter really sets in.
The aim would be to lock in at least a ceasefire framework, or even just significant de-escalation, before the humanitarian crisis deepens further with the onset of winter. This speed is absolutely essential to capitalize on any fragile momentum generated in Alaska before it completely dissipates into the unrelenting cold realities of the war.
This brings us to another bold and perhaps surprising diplomatic move outlined in our sources, a constitutional dilemma for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
A potential game-changer, perhaps.
For any meaningful, sustainable progress towards peace, Zelensky must absolutely be part of the equation, not merely briefed on the sidelines.
He has to be at the table.
Trump has already hinted at a trilateral format in the future, and Reykjavik could provide the perfect neutral stage for such a multi-party dialogue. but simple participation might not be enough.
Right. What else is needed?
Our sources suggest that a truly bold political gesture from Kiev itself could significantly shift the entire diplomatic calculus, altering the terms of the debate in a fundamental way.
And what is that proposed gesture?
The most viable, yet undeniably controversial move proposed by our sources is amending Ukraine's constitution to remove NATO membership as a strategic goal.
Wow. Okay, that is bold and controversial.
To truly grasp the weight of this, we need a bit of historical context. In 2019, then-President Petro Poroshenko oversaw a constitutional amendment that explicitly enshrined NATO and EU membership as Ukraine's long-term objectives.
A very deliberate move at the time.
This was primarily a symbolic statement, a clear and defiant stance against Russian influence, and a powerful declaration of Ukraine's unwavering European and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, a defiant middle finger to Moscow, basically.
But there's a stark geopolitical reality here that our sources highlight with considerable precision, often lost in the aspirational rhetoric.
What's the reality check?
NATO leaders have consistently said that while Ukraine's membership is irreversible in principle, it's utterly impossible during wartime. Article 5, which mandates collective defense, means that admitting Ukraine during an active conflict would immediately draw all NATO members into direct war with Russia,
Which NATO wants to avoid at all costs.
a scenario the alliance has explicitly stated it seeks to avoid. And even after peace, full membership would be subject to potential vetoes from wary members who don't want to directly provoke Russia or inherit a perpetually unstable frontier.
So it's not happening anytime soon, realistically.
Analysts widely acknowledge that NATO membership for Ukraine is, at best, a distant prospect, and at worst, an illusion, a promise without true deliverability in the near future.
So clinging to it might be counterproductive.
The key insight here is that by clinging to this constitutional clause, Kyiv gains little tangible security in the present, while inadvertently feeding directly into Putin's narrative of Western encirclement, which he cited again in Alaska as a core justification for his war of aggression. It's a symbolic aspiration that serves as a tangible pretext for the enemy.
That's a powerful narrative point for Putin, and it's one Kiev, perhaps unintentionally, gives him for free by maintaining that constitutional clause.
Exactly. Dropping this NATO clause could be a remarkably low-cost concession for Ukraine, especially given the actual military and political realities.
How is it low cost? It sounds huge politically.
Well, amending the Constitution does not bind Ukraine to neutrality forever. It simply removes a symbolic red flag, a constant provocation that Russia consistently weaponizes in its propaganda and justification for war.
So it's removing a pretext, not necessarily changing the long-term goal.
Ukraine would still be entirely free to pursue comprehensive EU integration, forge robust bilateral defense guarantees with other nations, or enter into other neutral security arrangements with a wide range of partners. This move wouldn't sacrifice a single inch of territory or compromise its sovereignty.
But it would take away Putin's argument.
But it would effectively disarm Putin's primary pretext for the invasion, cutting the legs out from under his narrative.
And how could Zelensky sell this domestically? To a war-weary but fiercely patriotic populace? That seems like the hardest part.
Our sources suggest he could masterfully present it as a heroic sacrifice to save Ukrainian lives, framing it not as capitulation or weakness, but as a pragmatic, strategic move to end the bloodshed and preserve the nation's very future.
A sacrifice for peace.
This isn't out of character for him either. Zelensky has already signaled his willingness to consider extraordinary compromises for peace. In February 2025, he explicitly stated he would even step down from the presidency if that secured lasting peace for his country.
He has shown willingness to go far.
Removing the NATO clause, therefore, would be a pragmatic and potentially survivable political maneuver, aligning perfectly with his stated willingness to make incredibly tough choices for the ultimate goal of peace. It's about fundamentally changing the equation for how other nations, and especially Russia, weigh their options.
Like changing the chessboard, as you said.
Imagine a complex chess game. Every move changes the board, opens new possibilities, or closes others. Removing that NATO clause from Ukraine's constitution wouldn't be a surrender, but it would remove one of Russia's primary justifications for war, essentially changing the entire chessboard and opening up new strategic avenues for both sides.
Okay, so if these moves happen, another summit, maybe in Reykjavik, maybe involving Zelensky, perhaps even this constitutional shift, what are the actual peace prospects according to the sources? Weeks? Months?
So if we look at the peace prospects now, given all these factors, The likelihood of a breakthrough within weeks is, unfortunately unlikely, pegged at a mere 10–20% by our sources.
Very low odds short term.
No ceasefire was achieved in Alaska, and Trump himself conceded that major issues remain unresolved. The war, unfortunately, continues at full intensity across the front lines.
But what about within months? Any better?
However, the possibility of peace within months is more plausible, estimated at a more hopeful 40–50%.
Okay, nearly a coin flip. What could make that happen?
If Moscow talks do occur, and critically, if Zelensky is brought into the discussion and joins a trilateral format, diplomacy could gain significant traction. Trump might also leverage powerful financial pressure points, such as the U.S. aid freezes, for instance, the $1 billion military aid package that was controversially paused in August 2025.
Using aid as leverage, that's controversial too.
By holding back crucial support, the U.S. could effectively signal to Ukraine that its capacity to sustain the war indefinitely is tied to diplomatic progress, thereby increasing its incentive to find a resolution. Conversely, it might also be a signal to Russia that the U.S. is willing to de-escalate if significant concessions are made, thus pushing negotiations along by changing the costs and benefits for both sides.
A high-stakes gamble with aid.
It's a high-stakes move, to say the least. Yet, skeptics warn that Putin could use these talks primarily to stall for time while consolidating his military gains on the ground, and that without real pressure, they may just be a distraction.
The talking while grabbing land strategy.
Exactly.
And as we touched on earlier, experts suggest that winter conditions could ultimately force concessions on both sides as the fighting becomes even more brutal, resource-intensive, and costly for everyone involved.
Winter could be a harsh catalyst.
But for now, despite the initial summit and the glimmer of dialogue, the tragic stalemate endures. #outro.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner keen on understanding the world? Our deep dive into the Trump-Putin summit shows us that diplomacy, even at its highest levels, is rarely a straight path. It's often a complex, messy mix of grand gestures and tiny incremental steps.
Yeah, it's rarely neat and tidy.
It's a stage where leaders perform, but also where real, painful, and often unpopular decisions need to be made to achieve peace. This raises an important question. In a world where a simple meeting of leaders is celebrated as a breakthrough, what kind of audacious yet pragmatic moves are truly required to achieve real peace?
What does it actually take?
The sources suggest it might involve unexpected concessions, a willingness to leverage all available pressure points, including historical symbolism, and even the controversial pause of crucial military aid, and an ability to strategically reframe politically difficult choices for the domestic audience to make them palatable.
It requires political courage, maybe more than just showmanship.
Definitely.
And perhaps the most provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day is the path to peace ultimately found in the dramatic, headline-grabbing summits with all their red carpets and fighter jet flyovers?
Big spectacles.
Or is it in the quiet, politically courageous decisions made far from the spotlight, away from the immediate glare of public opinion?
Where the real work might happen.
Trump and Putin have opened a door, albeit narrowly. But our sources make it clear it's up to all parties, particularly President Zelensky, to decide whether to push it wider and seize this fragile opportunity before it slams shut entirely, potentially condemning the conflict to become another endless, grinding war.
A critical juncture indeed.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.